Did you get any of this?
Gorillas go.
You gotta have the full experience.
There was very questionable things happening.
Stuffing their faces.
Doing backflips and roly-polies, poking each other in the eye. We'll leave that for when you go.
That you weren't really that excited.
I didn't know. I found that out last year.
Oi, hey, listen.
So if you're famous, hit me up.
Hi everybody and welcome back to episode 9 of the Safari Shots podcast, and today we're going to be talking about trekking the great apes in Rwanda specifically. And when I say we, I mean me and my co-host, Lance van der Vyver. Lance, how you doing, man?
Very well, thanks. Yourself?
I'm doing very well. I look a little bit like a mountain gorilla. I should have had a haircut this morning and then the barber was closed. But yeah, maybe by tomorrow I'll look a little bit more like a human again. I see you also sporting quite a nice beard.
Myself up. Yeah, I've just come back from safari. I've just come back from Rwanda. Good time to talk about it. I also need a trim, but yeah, that's next week's problem.
I just wanted to say it wasn't just any safari. It was literally, was it last week that you and Kirsten were in Rwanda trekking mountain gorillas?
That's right, yeah. Absolutely.
Well, guys, what we're going to do today is we are going to share with you what we think is the most important information if you want to do a photographic safari specifically to go and see the great apes of Rwanda. So, Lance, let's just start with the obvious. How easy did you find it to actually get to Rwanda, to Kigali, and, you know, to Volcanoes National Park specifically?
Yeah, so as far as African flights go, it wasn't the best. The two flights out of South Africa are not the best times. So we could either choose 3 in the morning and arriving there at 6 in the morning, which means you get there nice and early. You've got the whole day, but you get there at 6 in the morning. You've flown all night, so you're going to get there tired. So we actually chose the second option where we flew via Lusaka. So it's a 2-hour flight to Lusaka. We left at 4 in the afternoon, and then we stayed on the plane, because they still do that in some parts of the world apparently. We stayed on the plane for about 45 minutes to an hour, and then we carried on another 2.5 hours to Rwanda, and we arrived in Kigali, I think it was 9:30 at night, which is, okay. It sounds like a long day, and it kind of is a long day, but it's better in my opinion, because then you're there, you sleep the night, you have dinner, and then you wake up in the morning and you're ready to go.
Yeah, and I think the thing is, whenever I travel to a new country to go and do a safari, it's also good to just spend a little bit of time. You don't want to go straight onto your safari. Obviously, for a lot of people, you might have jet lag as well, but sometimes you just want to explore a little bit. So what we did was, when I went to Rwanda just over a year ago to trek chimpanzees, in fact, I went for sort of various different reasons, but one of them was to trek the chimpanzees. We actually spent our first day in Kigali. So we went to see one of the genocide museums and kind of just familiarized ourselves with the people and the country, which I always think is a good idea.
Yeah, so we actually do that as well. So we're planning on trying this for a set date workshop next year. And we're also going to advertise it for private trips at any time. But we also recommend that you get there the night before, you have a nice relaxed dinner, well, I call it a sleep, and you get up relatively early, you have breakfast, and then you hit the Genocide Museum. Is a good one. It's not necessarily for everyone, but it is very big part of the Rwandan history and culture, so definitely worth a look. And then after that, typically we recommend then having lunch and then a nice casual drive, because it's a relatively long one. It's 3.5 to 4 hours depending on the traffic, which is very hectic in Rwanda, and then up until Volcanoes. So obviously different direction to Nyungwe, but if you're heading towards the gorillas, we recommend that. So yeah, also a nice relaxed day.
Yeah, so just to make it clear, Lance and I did 2 completely different trips. He went to the northwest of the country to trek gorillas specifically, and I went to the southwest of the country to a place called Nyungwe National Park, where we trekked the chimpanzees. So we're going to be speaking a little bit about the differences of those. And before I forget it, Lance, speaking about those long drives, the country's not flat or straight at all, or at least the roads aren't straight. It's very windy, very hilly. So if you suffer from motion sickness, I very strongly recommend that you take something that's just going to help you on those windy roads.
Yeah, so both Kirsten and myself both suffer from motion sickness, which is terrible because my job is literally traveling. But we took the local Sturgeon, and I was actually fine. Kirsten felt a little bit wheezy, but she was stuck in the back with her shorter legs. But it wasn't too bad of a trip. So it's long and it's windy and it's a lot of uphills. It's a lot of open windows to get some air in, but it's a lot of diesel fumes as well from trucks and stuff that you're getting stuck behind. So it's not necessarily the nicest drive, but
I
it's
find
not a
sometimes I sometimes find that those are the toughest, is to, get from the city to those wild places, driving, knowing it's going to take another 5 or 6 hours. I find them quite tough, but I always kind of console myself in knowing that the best wildlife experiences are typically at the end of a tough road or a tough experience like that. So you basically just have to suck it up. And typically I found it with our local Rwandan guide. He knew exactly where to stop along the way where you can get a good meal and you have good clean toilet facilities as well. And if you have those, it already makes the trip, a lot easier and a lot more bearable.
Yeah, and it is one of those countries where it's exciting to be there. You're going for a very specific purpose, so there is excitement on the drive. So and it's an interesting drive to take because of the history, because of the way Rwanda works. The guides talk to you about how their country is functioning while you're driving. We come from a very dirty country, rubbish-wise. It's just our culture. People throw stuff on the ground all over the place. You're in a country where you will not see a single piece of trash, probably a whole trip. So just listening to them talking is very interesting. But also the drive is quite pretty itself. You're in these mountains and these rolling sort of foresty drives. So it's not an ugly drive. The most frustrating thing is the speed limit is 60 k's an hour. So you don't go far. You just don't go fast either.
Exactly. But I think before we get completely lost on the animal side and the trekking side of things, it's again worth mentioning, I'm sure there's a lot of you that wonder whether it's safe in Rwanda. And I'm sure you have the same concerns for many African countries. And I know I felt the same, or had the same worries when I went to Rwanda. And I don't know about you, Lance, but I felt 100% safe in Rwanda. The people were incredibly friendly. Like you said, it's a wonderfully clean country, and nothing about it made me feel nervous. Except maybe for those few corners that the guys drive a racing line, around the bends. But again, luckily because they drive so slowly, the chances of any kind of accident is really minimal. And I always, when I end up with a driver that I feel is taking a chance, I usually just say, "Oi, hey, listen, concentrate a little bit more, stick to your side of the road." But in general, I felt 100% safe in Rwanda.
Yeah, so I genuinely think there's some road rules that we don't know about in that country, because there was very questionable things happening. None of it unsafe, but you're just sitting there thinking, what on earth are we doing? But we won't surprise. We'll leave that for when you go. You can discover it. But yeah, like you say, I didn't feel unsafe once. Every single African country I've ever been to, including the one I live in, I don't leave my camera bag in the car. I don't leave anything in the car. I don't leave my cell phone in sight. There, we left everything in the car, and we never even thought about it. So, yeah, very safe country to be in.
Well, Lance, you would have done quite a lot of the research now before you and Kirsten went to trek the gorillas in Rwanda specifically. What was your thought process, and why did you decide to go and trek in Rwanda in volcanoes as opposed to going next door in Uganda, where you can obviously also trek mountain gorillas?
Yeah, so for anyone who's interested, we actually sell both. The workshop that we're going to offer will be Rwanda, but we do, through the same company on the ground that side, we actually sell both. They sell Uganda as well. And you can do some cool things in Uganda. You can actually get a filming permit, which is very expensive, and you can get a habituation permit, which is very expensive. But then you can spend longer times with the gorillas. But the biggest thing for us is typically the Uganda side, which is cheaper, is a much harder trek. You're in a much steeper area. You are literally in the rainforest. They cut the paths everywhere you go with the pungas type thing. Whereas Rwanda is a lot gentler. So we did 2 hikes. We walked about 5.5, 6 hours in total. That includes the hour with the gorillas both times. But never at any stage did we think this is too much. And my leg, for you who don't know, I have a hip replacement. My leg was exactly 1 year old to the day that I decided to climb 2 volcanoes, and I was absolutely fine. So you do breathe heavy going up because you are at altitude. but it's not hectic hiking. And then the second day was very different. We didn't really go up so much as along, but then it was very muddy. So the biggest risk was literally slipping and your legs disappearing out from under you. But you weren't sort of climbing and bashing through the forest like you think you do. But in saying that, gorillas do move, and it's not the same every time. But we apparently had 2 of the harder treks on the 2 days that we went, and we didn't think they were that hard at all.
Am I right in saying, though, that your guides will actually look at you or look at you on paper at least and say, well, listen, we're going to give you a slightly tougher trek because you're younger and you're fitter, or we'll give you a shorter, easier hike because you're maybe a little bit older and more frail?
Yeah, so that they definitely do that. So there's 24 groups of gorillas that can be seen every day. They only get seen once a day each, but there's 24 different groups on the Rwanda side. And there is, so that's 190 odd guests a day. And they are in every shape and form you can imagine. So definitely your guide secretly will actually do it with the parks the night before. These guests look like they'll make it up the mountain. These guests do not look like they'll make it up the mountain. And then you'll get split into age group, fitness level. If a guy a month ago could not walk at all. I think he might have been on his deathbed. They carried him up the mountain. Wow. The porters carried him on a stretcher. So they're really, if you want to go, it is possible. They will make a plan. It's yeah. But we like I said, we technically had the harder ones on the day. But if you have some form of level of fitness, you will be absolutely fine.
Yeah. And speaking of porters, this is their job, is basically to help you carry your equipment, and typically heavy camera equipment. Yeah. And for them, it's not a menial task. It's actually a job they're proud of. So don't feel bad to ever use a porter. This is how they make their living. And am I right in saying that actually helped a lot? So you've got this tough going and slippery terrain. You don't want to have to leave anything behind because you're worried it's too heavy. You can actually pay a porter to help you carry up that big. We'll speak about what lenses and cameras to take with in a second, but you can actually help. You can actually get some help to get up there.
Absolutely. So even if you are not taking anything with you, you should rent a porter. So the minimum amount you should pay them is $10 a trip, and that's the sort of minimum recommendation. But you can pay them whatever you like. It's your porter for the day. Even when they weren't lugging your gear, which for us, they lugged our gear, they help you. So while you're walking up a slippery area, they will be there holding your hand, pulling you up, pushing you if you need to be. I had a few shoves which stopped me going over at some point, which was very helpful. The one muddy day, Kirsten had her hand held the whole way if she liked it or not. The lady was not letting her fall in the mud. So even if you don't have equipment, it's $10 a day. It's nothing for us. It means everything to them, and it is so worth it because it just makes your day a lot easier.
Yeah. And I'm sure you said a second ago you did 2 treks. Why did you decide to go and trek twice as opposed to just going once, especially considering that it's quite an expensive activity?
Yeah, so it is sadly quite expensive, but it is a good thing being expensive. So 10% of all of the permits get given directly to the communities, and they do good with it. It's not like certain other African countries where that money just goes poof. So that is a good thing in itself. Also because it's limited to one group for 1 hour every single day, they need to make some money off the permit, so I see that. If you are an African, you may or may not get secret rates, which we won't tell everyone because they'll get angry at us, but talk to us. So yeah, we got lucky. We got a slightly different rate because we're agents. We go and check it out, but also because we're South African. And they're gorillas, right? They're a rainforest animal. You can get there one day and you can have 100 of them in an open field doing backflips and roly-polies, poking each other in the eye and doing all sorts of cool stuff. Or you could get them where they sleep and they don't get up because they do have certain times of day where they have very specific behavior. So they actually have a morning feeding period, a big siesta, where they do a lot of farting and other cool stuff like that. And then they get up and they have their lunchtime session. And the guys try and get you to them in between. So you're typically trying to find them when they're sleeping, and then as they're about to get up and do something cool. If the trackers haven't managed to find them yet, you might get them once they're already moving, which means it's a nightmare. You're trying to constantly keep up with gorillas who are just going through the stinging nettles, and you're trying to go around them. Or you might accidentally get them and they just happen to sleep in an hour later. So our silverback on the first day, he is the boss. He makes the rules. He wasn't waking up that first day. So they slept an extra way longer than they were supposed to. We were very lucky, though. They had a very cute little baby with them, so we just photographed that.
Awesomeness. And then I believe the second day you actually went to a family that had 6 or 7 silverbacks, showing you how different those 2 treks can be.
Yeah, so if you do 2 treks or more, there's no limit. You can do as many as you want, as long as you can fund it. They won't send you to the same group because they want you to get a different experience. So our first group was the Susas, one of Diana Fossey's first groups, very famous group, very large group. I've forgotten the exact numbers, but I think it was close to 22 or 24 individuals. And they had a 2-year-old baby and a 5-month-old baby, which is just stupidly cute. And I believe 2 silverbacks. So kind of a normal, typical big family, couple of boys, lots of ladies, lots of sub-adults and babies. The second group we went to, which was the Umbumbano, I think I've butchered that, but it's something like that. They had 6 silverbacks, 1 lady and 1 baby. Dynamics were completely different. So the boys only get to mate if they are number 1, and they all want to be number 1. So lots of bickering, lots of jostling to be number 1. One of them slapped another one about 2 feet in front of me, and everyone felt the slap. It was that hard. So a lot more, not scary, but some people would say that was a lot more scary. For me, I loved it because there was a lot more action going on. I missed absolutely every photo because I was way too close. But a little baby did that to us. The big boys didn't, but the big boys didn't bother. They just bashed each other. So yeah, you really should do more than one trek because it's going to be very different, just on the dynamics of the group itself, but hopefully behaviorally as well.
So I have an important question for you because I might now be sort of spilling the beans a little bit, but you told me before the trip that you weren't really that excited. I remembered you had a little bit of a meh kind of feeling about the gorillas, and I'll be completely honest with you. I've also always felt a little bit like that. I thought to myself, wow, but do I really want to travel halfway up the length of Africa to spend an hour with apes?
Yep.
And now that you're back, for those of you that don't know, Lance and I just had lunch together to chat a little bit about this podcast and obviously to catch about the trek. You loved it. So what is it at the end of the day that actually made you change your mind and enjoy it as much as you did? What is it about the actual experience, or is it the experience, or is it the photography? Is it just seeing something you haven't seen before? What made you really enjoy it as much as you did?
I think it's a mixture of all of those things. So for those who don't know, this is my wife's dream bucket list trip. I didn't know. I found that out last year. For me, I'm not really an ape person, like at all. Like if you say to me, should we go see orangutans tomorrow? Well, what else is there type thing. I don't know why. Me and apes, it's not my thing. So that was the first thing. Every single photo I think I've ever seen in the past of a gorilla is just a gorilla lying down, doing absolutely nothing. And that's what I had in my mind. I assumed we would get there, they would be sleeping. At most, one might sort of sit up and then roll back onto his face. And so, yeah, I just didn't think it would be very exciting for me. Photography-wise, I didn't think it would be that interesting as well. And then I genuinely dreaded the trek. So I've always had a dodgy leg. I've just got a new one. It's still, it's not healed 100%. The muscles aren't back. So I was worried the trek would kill me, and then I would get there, and these stupid big hairy things would just be sleeping. And it was the opposite. So the trek was actually enjoyable. I am not a person who goes for a walk for fun. You know that.
Someone says to me, "You want to go for a walk for fun?"
Exactly. So for you would absolutely love the trek. And then when we got there, the behavior was very cool. So the babies were playing the first time. The silverback, every time he did everything, all the other gorillas kind of stopped and paid attention to see what he was going to do. And then if he didn't do anything, they kind of carried on. And then, the babies are very cute. And it's not like a lot of other animals. A lot of other animals on game drive, they kind of look at you once and then they kind of ignore you, right? A gorilla, we're so related that they are looking what your face does, because that's how they're kind of communicating with you. So they will stare you straight in the eyes. Every now and then you'll turn around and there'll be a huge silverback staring you down from across the way, and you're like, oh, okay, and you know exactly what he's thinking because they're so expressive, just like us.
Wow.
So photographically, it was a lot better than I thought. Excitement-wise, it was a lot better than I thought. And then the trek was actually enjoyable. So I did like that as well.
That's awesome, and I'll ask you a little bit more about camera equipment specifically in a minute. But I just quickly want to chat a little bit about the chimpanzees and how it differs up to that point, because I think in many ways it's very similar, but in other ways it's very different.
Yeah.
So Nyungwe National Park, where you do the chimp trekking in Rwanda specifically, is massive. Apparently it's the largest protected mountain rainforest in all of Africa. It's 100,000 hectares in size. I think that's probably about almost 250,000 acres of protected rainforest, and extremely mountainous at very high altitudes. And that's obviously awesome because you get that almost like clouds in the forest, which is the most amazing thing.
Yeah.
If you stop at a viewpoint, you're looking down at the rest of the forest, but you're seeing clouds. So you're always aware of the fact that you're so high, which I find is awesome. But what makes that so tricky, unlike any other national park in Southern Africa or even in East Africa where you're going to game drive, you don't have game drive roads. You have a road that gets you into the park, and in the case of Nyungwe, it's a big main tarmac road that goes to Burundi. So there's trucks and other cars that run through, it's a public road. And there are even soldiers on that road because you're close to the border. So there's some kind of military presence just for safety reasons. Not that there's any reason to be worried to be there, but it's just because you're so close to the border. But that means that whenever you want to do any kind of trekking or activity, you have to meet at a center, so one of the main visitor centers. And in Nyungwe, the Uwinka visitor center is the main one in the middle. And then from there, you do your specific activities. And in Nyungwe specifically, a lot of people go there to do bird watching because they've got, I think it's about 330 plus species of birds. And 29 or 30 of them are Albertine Rift endemics. So birds that you can't see anywhere else in Africa other than that Albertine Rift. And believe me, some of them are amazing. I showed you photos of those great blue turacos. They're 75 centimeters long. They look prehistoric. And then you find them in a flock. And you could literally just see them on the main road. So what we did was we did a combination of trekking, but also hikes where we went bird watching and looking for other primates specifically, because there's actually 13 different primates in Nyungwe that you could come across. So I think from what I understand from what you did, it's a little bit different in Nyungwe where you kind of do other activities in the national park as well, as opposed to just trekking.
It's actually a very similar setup. So what we didn't know, which is what we'll now tell all of you and what everyone else will now know, is the same thing. So you drive to the national park gate, basically, or the headquarters of the gorilla treks. And then you get assigned your group, you get assigned your ranger or your guide for the day, and then you actually drive off to different locations. So we had no idea. We assumed where you sort of got together in your groups, you would leave on your trek from there. But you don't. You get assigned where you're going to go, which group of gorillas you're going to see. You get assigned your ranger, and then you get back in your vehicles and you drive. So we actually drove up to, I think, we were the furthest group away, being the Susas on our day. we actually had to drive an hour before we got there, before we started walking. So it's also something to be aware of, because we didn't know that. So, which means hardly anyone will know that as well. So it's also similar to your story. You have a central beginning point, and then you kind of spread out like a spider web.
I spoke to a guy one day in our hotel, late afternoon. In fact, I think we were just sitting down for dinner, and this oak was broken. And it sounded like they got up at 4 o'clock, drove for 4 hours, hiked for the rest of the morning, had an average sighting of the chimps, and then had to come all that way back. And he was emotionally and physically ruined. So again, I suppose, all the more reason to maybe do 2 treks. I was surprised, though, because he was a little bit older. I was surprised that they took him to such a, it was such a severe hike. But I suppose there are certain days that some of the families are just not close. Just one of those things. Yeah. I must say, I admire these rangers for actually keeping an eye on the families of gorillas and chimpanzees, because, they have to leave them late afternoon and then go home and then find them again the next morning. So they're trekking 2 or 3 times the distance that the guests do, because they just, they have to keep an eye on these gorillas and chimps all the time. And then they stay with them
the whole day. Yeah.
Exactly.
So I believe, but talking to people that we also know who have done both, that the chimps are way harder. So typically the chimpanzees' distance in a day is tenfold what the gorillas will do. So when we were with the gorillas, we wouldn't have moved more than 100 meters in the hour. Whereas the chimpanzees, sometimes you're almost jogging to keep up with these things as they take off through the bush. So.
Well, I'll tell you what happened to us. So we had to do the same thing where we met each other very early in the morning to leave on the drive. It was still dark. Our drive took about 2.5 hours to get to where we went into the forest. Very steep, very slippery, like extremely muddy. They did give us walking sticks to help a little bit. And then we were lucky. We found the troop probably half an hour in, so it wasn't far. But like you said, they're on the move. And it's very hard to get close to them, very hard. And remember, the chimps are often in the treetops, high up. Yep. So a lot of what you do, you look up at them and you photograph up at them, so you have these shots of them looking down. But what was obviously great is because these rangers and the guides have such incredible knowledge, not only of chimpanzees and gorillas in general, but of specific individuals, they said to us, right, let's look at what's around us and then anticipate where they're going to go. And what they did was they just looked for the biggest fruiting tree in the area. And we just waited there.
Perfect.
And it felt weird because you find them and you hear them and you're like, but why are we walking away from them? And we basically all just stood underneath this tree. I can't remember exactly what kind of tree it was, but we stopped in such a position that we could see these hanging fruits come down. And lo and behold, this enormous chimpanzee walked right towards us, right past us, like literally almost within touching distance, and then climbed the tree right in front of us. And right behind him was a second one. And up they went, and they started stuffing their faces. So it was an incredible experience. And you and I spoke about a little bit earlier, 3-4 hours ago when we were stuffing our own faces with pizza. We were talking about the size differences and how small the gorillas look to you and how big the chimpanzees look to me. Those big male chimpanzees are absolutely enormous, like frighteningly enormous.
Yeah. So I'm sure it must be movies or it can't be King Kong. It's got to be something else, but in my head, a big silverback gorilla was bigger than me, taller than me. When he sort of sat up, he'd be halfway up my body height. When he was walking on all fours, he'd be close to my head height. That's just the picture I had in my head. They are way heavier than us. They're about 175 to 200 kilos. I mean, they're big. And their forearms were thicker than my leg, for sure. But they're tiny. I mean, the huge, big silverbacks. We pulled in, and the guy's like, "Wow, look how big this silverback is!" And I was like, "Is it behind this baby one? Because what are we looking at here?" And it turns out he was talking about that.
Amazing, eh?
I mean, a big silverback walking would be maybe 3.5 foot, maybe 4 foot tall when he's walking on all fours. It's just not what I had in my mind. They were a lot cuter than I thought they would be.
I enjoyed the stuff that you mentioned earlier, where they look so similar to us. When I took photographs and when I filmed them, I focused a lot on their fingers and on their facial expressions. We watched them literally pick berries and fruit from the tree and then putting in their faces. And so a lot of that stuff for me, I really, really enjoyed. And another thing that I loved about the chimpanzees, which I'm assuming you don't get quite the same amount from the gorillas, is the vocalization. I mean, we all know the classic, like, that proper, I probably botched it, but that proper chimp scream. So the one day we are driving on the main road, just bird watching, stopping on the side of the road, looking for those turacos and a few other species that we were looking for specifically. And when I say we, it was myself and my bird guide, Claver, who's apparently like a legend in the area. And as we were stopping looking at the birds, we started hearing the screaming coming from the forest. And one of the unhabituated groups, I don't want to say wild group because they're all wild, but one of the untracked or unfollowed groups crossed the road right in front of us. So suddenly we had chimps running across the road in front of us and behind us. And they were obviously quite shy, but they were screaming like full berries, and it was I just got goose flesh. And this was before our trek, and that obviously got me super duper excited. So I enjoyed the chimp trekking much more than I thought I would, but I think it's because of the environment that I was in and the other things that I had experienced up to that point as well. Sort of seeing the chimps in their natural environment together with the birds and the other monkeys and just that environment is what made the experience. It felt like I got a true African rainforest experience.
Yeah. So I must admit, tracking the gorillas as well, just walking and looking. So there's not that many birds up in the Volcanoes mountains that we saw, hardly any. And sadly, the ones we did see were the ones we get here, so it was a little bit disappointing. But just looking, because it's proper rainforest, the huge big, I'm assuming they're a species of fig tree, which sort of drape over and they've got moss all over them, is so cool. But you're asking about the gorilla vocalization. They actually talk all the time.
Really?
You, before you go in, must get a briefing from your guide on how to speak gorilla. Because if a gorilla goes
give us some
at you, it basically means you're doing something he doesn't like and he's going to squash you, and then your guide's going to tackle you out the way. And then gorillas go, and that means I'm okay, you're okay, everyone's okay.
Stand still, relax, and keep practicing. He will be happy with that. He can come even brush next to your leg. No problem.
So you walk around constantly going, and especially when a gorilla looks at you and starts moving towards you, everyone starts going, and it's basically saying to the gorilla, I'm having a good time, and then they'll do it straight back. So every time the gorillas did it, all the rangers did it, all the trackers did it, and then all the guides sort of... The scary thing is, when a gorilla walks straight up to you and stares you in the face, you try and go, and you end up going, and then the guides take over for you.
That's hilarious. That's brilliant, though. But that's all part of the experience. Yeah,
it's very cool. So everyone assumes they're joking. They tell you how to speak gorilla. You must do this, you must do this. And everyone's like, ha, ha, ha. You pull into the sighting and the guide starts going, and everyone's like, oh, shit, now we must be serious. And then one other day, they sounded like that chimpanzee, like chaos fighting noise, because that was the 6 boys. One had found something he wanted to eat and others wanted it. And this whole thing kicked off. They were all in the bush. They couldn't even see each other, but it kicked off, and it was very interesting to listen to as well. Getting back to, you said before that your guides gave you sticks and things. Did they also sort you out with gaiters and things like that? Because I know where we stayed, you got given gaiters so you didn't ruin your pants and your shoes. I'm assuming there was lots of thorns where you were as well, so they protect you like that.
It's interesting. So we did not get gaiters. They did give you a little brief in terms of you've got to wear longs, you've got to put your socks over your longs, and you've got to have hiking boots. The reason for the socks over the longs is there's fire ants in the forest. So if you stop for too long in one spot, you get fire ants. And it's interesting because we weren't warned at all about stinging nettles. And so I think the vegetation in Nyungwe is slightly different. Nyungwe's forest reminded me of sort of what we would find in South Africa in Magubaskloof or down in Knysna. It's a much more forgiving forest floor. In other words, it's not quite as dense as the photographs and the videos that I've seen up in volcanoes.
Yeah.
So I think it's an easiest forest to trek in for, except possibly what matches is the steepness and the muddiness of the treks, or of the tracks itself. So what I would say, grip is extremely important. So good hiking shoes with knobblies, so you can have good grip.
Absolutely.
Long socks so that you can put it over your longs, and then that walking stick is super duper important. And we didn't. I remember you saying that you had to actually put your gear down before you approach. We could actually take our day packs and our gear with to the chimps, and I think it's because you have to move so far. Everything doesn't necessarily happen in a relatively small area. But again, maybe it's just where we were, but everywhere, even where I did bird watching, the going was a little bit easier. It wasn't so much banga slashing our way through. But again, I'm just talking, from one experience as opposed to, doing it for years and years.
Yeah. Yeah. So we admittedly, we only cut the forest when we were with the gorillas. Walking up to find them, there's very well-defined tracks that kind of crisscross all the way through the forest. And the guides are in contact with the rangers who know where the gorillas are or know where they last were. So you get yourself in the best place to be close by them on the track. And then once you find them, we drop our bags, you drop your sticks, because apparently when they got poached, that's how they killed them, was with sticks. So you don't take sticks into a gorilla sighting.
Okay.
And then the bags, because you don't really know how long you're hiking for, they're often full of goodies from the lodge. So bananas, fruit, juices, all of that kind of stuff. So you're not taking a chance with a gorilla sniffing out a banana in your bag and then possibly ripping you and your bag apart to get to it. So, but yeah, we definitely had stinging nettle, and it is definitely something we'll be telling all of our guests who go to watch out for. Oddly, the gorillas eat it, so shows what we know.
Oh, really? Well, so the toughest trek that I actually had in Nyungwe was one day, and definitely something that you have to do if you go there, is ask them to take you to go and look for the Rwanda pied colobus monkeys, or black and white colobus monkeys as they're known. And I'm pretty sure if you Google it and you see what I'm talking about, you will have seen them. You'd have seen photos of it before. It's the most beautiful, pure white and pure black monkey, fluffy, long fur. The babies are white. They're the most amazing things. And in Nyungwe, in that sort of Uwinka area is a troop of 500 plus. So there's trekkers with them as well, or rangers with them. So we one day, found out where they were, trekked in. Like I said, it was almost a harder trek than it was with the chimps specifically. And there they were, but again, high up. There you've got to make sure that your neck muscles are stretched and you've got your long lenses, because they're typically way up in the canopy. But it's cool because they also vocalize and they move fast. If they start moving, they move quite fast through the trees. But what's cool about that, it gives you a chance of maybe getting some jumping shots or videos where they actually jump from one tree to the next. So they're much, much smaller than the chimps and the gorillas, but awesome to see. And you would have seen it as well. There's lots of other smaller monkeys, sometimes even closer to the camps. I can't even remember half the names, but like I said, other than the chimps and these colobus monkeys, there's 11 other primate species, all smaller monkeys, that you just see on the main road or when you're in the lodge, or just trekking the others. So there's actually a lot more to see there than you might think, at least at Nyungwe.
Yeah, so up by Volcanoes, it's a little bit different. So the actual volcanoes are the national park, and the second they end, it's farmland. So there's a 4-foot high brick wall fence, and that is the border of the park. Outside that, it's farmland all the way back to Kigali. So you don't see things around the lodges. The lodges are on main roads, very well secluded, very pretty. You feel very tropical and away from it all, but you are on the main roads, depending on how much you want to spend. But one of the other monkeys we also recommend is on our last day we do a golden monkey trek. So the golden monkey's way cheaper. I think it's $29 a permit versus $1,500 for a gorilla permit. And it's funny because I think they took us for a hike just so that we could say we hiked for the gorilla monkeys. So we parked in the car park. We went around to the edge of a forest. We went through what can only be described as mud, like knee-deep mud, for about 25-30 minutes. And then we popped out here 10 minutes from the car park where the monkeys were. And then when we walked home, we walked straight back to the cars, which took us 5 minutes.
You've got to have the full experience.
Yeah. But I genuinely think they did it for us so that we could say we trekked them rather than we just walked over there and we saw them.
And let me guess, they weren't actually golden, were they? Just a slight little yellow-brown color, maybe?
Yeah, so the males are gold. It's probably similar to this sort of color on the back.
Okay, that's not bad, actually.
More of a dirty yellow. And the males are quite big. The females are very pretty. It's a small monkey as well. So I think it's actually smaller than the colobus monkeys. So the females are yay high, like a foot, maybe not even a foot. The males are quite chonky. They're probably like small dog, 2 times a house cat sized monkey. And the interesting thing with them is they eat a lot of bamboo. So we found them in the bamboo forest, but we found them on the edge of the farmland because they also really like potatoes. So you get a nice mix of nice open fields with clean backgrounds and then forest. So it's actually quite nice. They're very hard to take photos of because they're very quick. But you come away with different photographs from a sighting. Whereas if you find the gorillas and the chimps in one spot, you tend to get sort of one type of photo for the day. So yeah, but that was really cool as well.
Now, speaking about photographs, and probably a nice way to end this podcast is let's quickly talk about camera equipment specifically. When I was photographing the chimpanzees specifically, I know for a fact you just don't get as close as you do the gorillas. It's a much more dynamic trek. You're constantly on the move. Often the chimps are constantly on the move. And a lot of the time they're high up in the trees. And at least where we were, it was super dark. So I used mostly my 100 to 500 millimeter lens. 100 obviously to get a little bit of the environment in, but at 500 I was able to at least zoom into not only those fingers and the eyes, but also to the ones just sitting high up. So for the chimps, I would certainly recommend having something like 100 to 500, 100 to 400 if you still use that older Canon lens, or 150 to 600 or something in that sort of zoom range. Of course, if you have a 200 to 400 or something like that, go for it. But that heavy lens is going to make it tricky, even if you have a porter to photograph up like that. So I would say a light, versatile zoom lens worked really well. And I probably go as far as to saying that I think a 70 to 200 is too short for the chimps, except if you take that as a backup and you're super lucky and you get them very close. But what did you feel like with the gorillas? What would you say was the best focal length or focal lengths that you used?
Yeah, so it's a hard... My first question when you ask me what should I take would be how many cameras and how many lenses do you have and what do you have? If I had everything and I could only take one lens, it would either be a 200 to 400 or it would be the Canon 100 to 300 2.8. So I took my 400 2.8. A lot of people who have been before told me don't take that, it's going to be way too close. A lot of people, and good photographers, and I'm very glad I did not listen to them. I shot the majority of the images on the 400 prime, and it was perfect because it's very good in low light. When the clouds come in, they come in thick. It's the same as Nyungwe. You're above the clouds, so you're also in thick clouds and in thick areas. So you're shooting a lot of 2.8 if you can. Kirsten shot on the 200mm f2, and she shot a lot at f2, which was also a very nice lens for it. a lot of people say 70-200 if you only have one lens. I would also agree that that's a little bit too short. I would rather take a 100-400 or the 100-500 than a 70-200.
Yeah,
So
because
I
you want to
took
do
two. I
those
took the
close-ups of
400.
faces and stuff, right?
Yeah. And so where we were, it might just be our treks, but we never got anywhere where you could zoom out and get a lot of sort of nice environment and a gorilla. If you zoomed out, you just had bushes and a gorilla's sort of face sticking up like this. So the majority of the stuff was closer. There was maybe 3 times where I really wish I had a third camera, because I had my 400, I had my 70-200, which I did use a lot, but I used it at 200 mil almost always. So next time I would be tempted to take the 400, the 200 f2, and then something wide, but only if you have the cameras available for it, for if they walk right past you and you have a chance to get low and kind of photograph the whole animal and make it look big and powerful like we think it is in our heads. Because I had maybe, I don't even think it was 3. There's one that comes to mind, opportunities where if I had like a 16 mil or something like that, it would have been incredible. I also might have died because we were supposed to get out of the way at that point. So
I find that what I find that the trickiest often with these exclusive experience where you have limited time, which, you know, let's face it, at a lot of the other things that we do on safari, we have lots more time because we can always go back to the Pride of Lions or to the hyena den or whatever it might be. I find it's so hard to divide your attention between now I'm taking photos, now I'm taking videos, which is great with the iPhone when there's vocalization and movement like that little baby you guys saw. And then also you need to give yourself time to put all of that down and just appreciate what you might actually only experience once in your life to one of your closest living relatives, you know, the great apes. So I would say before you go in there, if you're only doing one trek, just try and make a point of it to
don't do one.
A third of the time photograph, a third of the time film, and then a third of the time actually just enjoy. And if you're really fortunate enough to do that, go a second time so that you can either take better photos if you didn't have that the first time around, or spend more time just watching them and enjoying being in their presence and listening to all those vocalizations as opposed to just looking through the lens.
Yeah, it's actually a good point of another reason of why to do more than one trek. It's also, we were chatting about it a little bit before, like how and where does trekking fit in with a safari? Do you leave your home country and go all the way to Rwanda for a gorilla trek and then go home? No. Or is it more of like an add-on to another safari? You do the Masai Mara, maybe the Serengeti, or we come down to Southern Africa and then you finish with there and then go home, which is a good way of doing it. Then one trek may be okay, but it's gonna turn out a lot more expensive to go and do one trek than being there for an extra day or two and actually really enjoying it and getting the full experience.
And I don't know whether you agree with me or not, but I would actually rather do the 2 treks than try and combine it with a, let's call it a big 5 type safari in Rwanda or in Uganda. In other words, going up to the northeast to Nyungwe National Park in Rwanda, where they've got the big 5, or going to Queen Elizabeth National Park in Uganda. I know for some people they want to do that for very specific reasons. Maybe they just want to see a new park, or they want to look for a shoe bill, or whatever it might be. But personally, I would go, if you just want to go for the gorillas, go all out, like Lance suggested, and do multiple treks. Or if you want to see the big 5 as well, go to the hotspots. Rather go up to the Mara. Or I did a trip there now in March, where one of my clients, I said up there, it was in Serengeti, and one of my clients did his bucket list trek just before he came to the Serengeti with me, and he absolutely loved it because he's already flying halfway across the world. So I went to Akagera now when I was in Rwanda, and even though I thoroughly enjoyed it because it was new and different, looked different, felt different, it's nothing as close as good as what you experience in the Northern Safari Circle or circuit, I should say, in Tanzania or the Masai Mara. So I would personally rather go and do it as a bolt-on if you want to do it with a classic Big 5 safari as well.
Yeah, I would say if you are not a photographer, it already helps, because then, like you say, there's lots of bird species and other ape species in the country that you won't see in a lot of other places. But if you're a photographer, most of those are very difficult, and the time between parks is massive. But
Yeah.
I would normally say, you're either doing it as a double check with a gorilla, a golden monkey, or you go, say if you wanted to do a week in Rwanda, make it a chimpanzee, nice slow drive up to volcanoes, then a gorilla trip, rather than trying to do big five. And the guys will actually say it to you. They said it to us. Obviously, they're very proud of their country. They want people to spend more time in their country. They want you to spend your money in their country. And they said, listen, we have the big five here. And then they also say, but if you've been on a game drive anywhere else in Africa, don't bother. So it's one of those things. They are there, but you're not necessarily going to have the best time.
You know what? I would do exactly that. If you gave me now a week and a nice big fat budget to go to Rwanda, I would do exactly that. I would do a couple of treks of the gorillas, and then I would drive down to Nyungwe. I'd go and do the chimp trekking, and I'd spend some time bird watching as well. And I even forgot to mention it earlier. At Uwinka, at the visitor center, there's an awesome trail called the Igishigishigi Trail. I practiced that for long. And on the Igishigishigi Trail, they have, I think it's one of the highest and longest forest canopy walks in the world. It's 70 meters high, so 210 feet or however high it is. And it's quite scary walking on it, but it basically takes you into and above the forest canopy to do bird watching. And it is mind-blowing, absolutely mind-blowing.
Yeah,
and you don't even,
very cool.
It's not even a particularly long hike. I think it's an hour and a half in total doing that. There's so many awesome things to do if you take a week and you focus on the two great apes and you add a little bit of bird watching as well, and then, leave the lions and the leopards and all of that stuff for a different time. But before you see it, another hour is gone, Lance. So thanks so much for that. And just to end off, am I right in saying that, we can go on and on about accommodation and flights and stuff like that. But if anybody wants to go and see the great apes, whether that's gorillas or chimpanzees in Rwanda or Uganda, all they have to do is pop you an email at Panthera Photo Safaris, link in description, and you will give them options based on their budget.
Absolutely, yeah. So we work with guys on the ground there. They're DMCs, so they sell to us. You don't pay us extra to go. You're paying the same rate you'll do it to go yourself. But our guys know all the nitty-gritty, all the inside out. You will be picked up from the airport by your driver, taken to all the hotels, taken to the treks, and then taken all the way back to the airport very smoothly, all handled for you. And we work on 4 budgets. Very cheap, which is not recommended in Rwanda. You won't enjoy very cheap. There's moderate, there's medium. Medium, you're looking at about $500 to $600 a day, which is not too bad for accommodation. All the way up to, we went for a site inspection at One and Only, which is one of the prettiest lodges I've ever seen in my life. So you're talking fine dining, spa treatments and things that you can't imagine, cooled pools, heated pools,
room for your bodyguard, don't forget that.
Room for your bodyguard underneath your private suite if you're famous. So if you're famous, hit me up. And they start at about $3,500 per room, so not per person, per room, all the way up to $27,500 per room. So whatever your budget is, there is something for you there. Yeah, I wouldn't. This is the other thing that I say is difficult with Rwanda. I wouldn't say it's the cheapest country in the world for safaris. So a lot of safaris you can get away with that $300-ish per person per day. It's becoming very, very rare. But you also you have to pay for a driver to drive you around. You can self-drive. You'll die though. Trust me, if I've got any video, I don't think I do, but if I've got some video of those roads, you don't want to drive there yourself. So you've got a driver, you have the porters to tip, the rangers to tip, the guides to tip, obviously the lodge staff to tip. You'll want a massage after your trek, so you have to factor that in. So it's reasonable to too expensive as a destination. It's not a very cheap destination, and considering it's so short as well, it can add up quite quick.
And top tip, just bring lots of small denomination and new dollar bills with. So your 1s and your 5s and your 10s, but make sure they're recent bills. A lot of these African countries, even though they use the US dollar, they don't want you to be using bills from the year 2000. So just go to the bank or to the bureau and just get yourself some nice small denominations, nice fresh clean bills.
Yeah, on that, if you don't want to travel with a lot of dollars to a random African country, I'm not sure about Nyungwe side, but up in Volcanoes with the gorillas, it's very easy to go to an ATM. The ATMs are in a secured building. It's just you in the room, and it was very easy to get out local currency to use. So porters, any sort of knickknacks you want to buy along the way, you can all use local currency, which was very easy once we found out that you could do it. Yeah.
I certainly did not see that at Nyungwe. Well, guys, I've got two important things that I want to say just before we end. And the first is that we are now available on Spotify. So if you want to listen to the Safari Shots podcast when you're driving to the Kalahari or on a long flight or wherever it might be, go and check us out there. This should be the 9th episode, so the second last one in season 1. And then last but not least, please go and remember to check out those 2 links at the top of the video description that will take you to our Patreon pages. So the first is the Panthera Photo Safaris Conservation Fund. And I know I always just skim over this, but it's actually super duper important. It's basically where you can make a monthly donation, a small donation that goes a really long way, where as that money pulls up, Lance and Kirsten of Panthera Photo Safaris has money available if there's a conservation emergency. It might be a sick pangolin that needs help, or a hyena with a snare, or a rhino that needs dehorning, whatever it might be. And the more money that they have in that fund, the quicker that they can help that animal. And it usually pays for things like vet bills and helicopter costs, medicine and all that sort of stuff. So if you're looking for a worthy cause to donate to every month, go and check out that link. And then there's also my own personal Patreon link where you can basically just support me as a full-time content creator. And that's what allows me to make these videos each and every week. Lance, almost at the end of this season, one more to go. Thanks so much for chatting to me about the family members, the great apes. And I know that you're heading off to, who knows where. I think you're heading off to East Africa. I'm heading to Botswana.
Yeah.
So next time we see each other, we're going to have some awesome things to talk about.
Very, very cool. Yeah. The next one, I might be overseas when we do this. Let's see how this goes.
I know, right? First world problems. Cool, Lance. Have a fantastic day and cue our awesome semi-new intro.